After finally finishing Metaphor ReFantazio, I can safely say that this is not only one of the best games or JRPGs of 2024, but one of the best games and JRPGs of all time. Now, it goes without further ado, I do not do spoilers, so most of the footage of this game will be in the opening part of the game in order to avoid spoilers. And if you'd like to see more of this content, please consider liking and subscribing. Without further ado, let's get into it. When I first fired up Metaphor ReFantazio, I was skeptical at first because I've never played any of the Persona games, nothing like that of the sort. So this was my first go around, and I was quite blown away. This game, starting off with the game's visuals, is on a technological standpoint, the visuals are not particularly great. That being said, however, the art style is very artistic and makes the game beautiful. So that's the thing with this game. Yes, visually, the game doesn't seem to be like to blow you away technologically, but artistically, whether it's the environments, the characters, or even the animation that happens for the story cutscenes, all of which in terms of an art style is absolutely fantastic. Also with the designs of the characters and the enemies are on point. Audio wise, this game for the most part is very, very good. The dialogue from the voice actors is very, very done well. However, the main protagonist is typically of the quiet front. You don't really hear much from the main protagonist other than major cutscenes. But the rest of the cast of characters you do hear from quite a bit, and the voice acting is done really well and very well written. Also, the musical score in this game is some of the best in the business. I wouldn't say it's the best music I've heard in a video game, but it's definitely very, very good and accompanies the game very, very well. In terms of how this game plays, how is the combat of Metaphor? Well, if you're new to the Persona series like me, I never played it. The combat in Metaphor ReFantazio has two different parts. The first part is the open world combat. Now, open world combat in general, if the enemy is weaker than you can just hack them without entering the turn-based combat. And you kill them and away you go. However, if the enemy is at your level or above your level, you then need to hit them repeatedly to possibly get them into a staggered state so that you can have an advantage going into the fight, essentially giving you not only a leg up in terms of damage, but a leg up in terms of the turns, as the enemy will start stunned and you get to go first. However, if the enemy hits you first, you're the one that's staggered and they get a free round of turns to deal damage to you, which can be catastrophic depending on your current health pool at the time and the enemy that hits you. But once you get into the turn-based mechanic, there is no ATB gauge like from olden days. What it is you have your turn and you have multiple turn icons, and you go through your icons. If you hit the weakness, you'll do a half drain of your icon, allowing you for more future turns. And once you deplete all your turn icons in a singular turn, then the enemy goes. And they'll do all their icons and rinse and repeat that process. You will lose icons if the enemy blocks or dodges an attack, vice versa. But if you hit their weakness or a critical hit, you gain extra turns on that turn. And the combat is really, really good. It's really, really fun. And especially when you start progressing through the game and you get more and more characters and more archetypes, more on that in a moment, you will be able to then combo and do like dual attacks or triple attacks that really spice up the combat itself. Narratively speaking, this game is absolutely fantastic, but it is a journey. We are talking about 80 to 100 hours just to complete the story. I played the game on the normal difficulty, and my playthrough, as stated in the thumbnail, was roughly 90 hours long. I did complete most of the side content and did manage to get pretty much all of my companions to max level before completion. So there is a lot to do in this game, and you will get good value proposition. But with regards to the story itself, the story is basically as follows. You are a friend of the prince. The prince has been fallen to a curse, and you are trying to lift the curse in order to save your kingdom from the evil antagonist Luis. That is basically the gist of the story without going into any spoilers. There is a lot of twists and turns along the way, but I will not get into that. But the story is definitely well written, definitely well paced, and that is the best part about the game's story is things are constantly moving, and if you're not learning something new about the overarching story, you're learning something new about one of the characters, whether that character is in your party or a side character or the antagonist. You're always learning something new about the characters and the story, which is really good. And of course, this is all accompanied by great animation sequences that help flesh out the story even more. Now, I mentioned earlier about archetypes. Now, archetypes are basically like their jobs. Jobs such as mages, clerics, warriors, knights, etc. And as you progress through the game, you'll unlock more and more of these archetypes. And any character can basically adopt any archetype as long as they meet certain requirements. And these archetypes, it allows for a level of depth in the game because you can create different setups, different combos. There was even one boss, because of a setup that I used, I was able to one-shot a boss in one turn. So there is a lot of creativity and strategy that goes into the game, which adds to the layer of challenge. So I played the game on normal, and the game is not a walk in the park on that difficulty. There will be some instances, particularly with some bosses, where you may have a hard time, and that's only because you went into that encounter without the right setup. And that's basically how it is. When you get the right setup, the encounter can become incredibly easy. So the game does reward exploration. It does reward doing side content because the more stuff you do, the more experience you gain, the more archetypes you have, the more freedom you have for setups and squad layouts when you go into an encounter. So that's a lot of what's good about the archetype system and how deep the archetype system goes. Lastly, let's get into the biggest elephant in the room that I had with this game. Overall, my experience with Metaphor ReFantazio is positive. One of the best games I've ever played, hands down. But for some reason, we still have a critical design flaw with RPGs. Now, for me, I was okay because I have been using multiple save files for games for years, ever since I had save files deleted on me in the old Super Nintendo cartridges. So I've been trained to always have 3, 4, 5 different save files. In the case of Metaphor, I had 5 different save files at different points in time. I cannot stress this enough. If you decide to play Metaphor ReFantazio, you must have multiple save files. Because the biggest issue I have with this game is it is quite possible, if you only use one save file, to lock yourself out of progressing through the game. There were 2 instances, particularly with boss fights, where you could hard lock yourself if you went into that encounter unprepared and you only had one save file and you couldn't do anything. The worst of it all, one of these encounters is the final boss. Let me tell you, it is one of the most BS things I have ever seen in a boss encounter. Again, I was fortunate enough that I had multiple saves, so when I reached the final boss, I was leveled enough, I had enough items that I was able to tweak things freely without having to go to a previous save. But if I didn't have the proper items and equipment and things that I can use to change my power, I would have had to use a previous save file earlier before the final boss encounter. Or if I didn't have one at all, I would have been screwed and not be able to beat the game. So this is one of the things that, to me, I don't know why they do this in RPGs. Why? It's not the first time I've experienced this, where you get to an encounter and the game doesn't tell you, hey, look, have a spare file because if you're not set up, you could be screwed. No. What the game tells you is, hey, you're about to fight a tough encounter. Make sure you're prepared. And if you are the type of person who only uses one save file, and you go in there unprepared or not prepared enough, you could screw yourself. And the worst of it is, one of these moments is the final boss. Imagine playing 80 hours, you use one save file, you get to the final boss, and then you're screwed. You're literally screwed out of beating the game because you're not equipped enough and you can't go anywhere. You can't back up. You can't grind. You can't go to a store. You can't do anything. So it is a critical game design flaw in my opinion. I don't know why they do this, but it is the biggest knock I have on Metaphor ReFantazio. Again, for me, personally, my experience, I always have multiple save files, so I was good regardless. But even then, I didn't need to use them because going into the final boss, I had completed most of the side activities. So I was in good shape with items, gear, and the flexibility that I could change to different archetypes to create different compositions to beat the final boss. But if you're not prepared, if you have one save file, you could literally lock yourself out of the game. And there's, like I said, 2 instances. One is the final boss. Another one is an earlier boss in the game. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you have multiple save files when you play Metaphor ReFantazio. Aside from this, Metaphor ReFantazio was a flawless experience for me. No bugs, no glitches. It ran very well on my Steam Deck when I played on my Steam Deck as well. Overall, this was a fantastic experience, a fantastic game through and through. Other than that one hiccup, I highly, highly, highly recommend any RPG fan to try this game out. There is a free demo for people to try where progress does carry over if you don't want to spend the money up front. Overall, I loved Metaphor ReFantazio. I do think it's a Game of the Year contender. Just be mindful of that one glaring issue with the possibility of getting locked out of the game if you only use one save file. Overall, I'm giving Metaphor ReFantazio a 9 out of 10. This is Veteran Gamer, and I hope to see you guys next time.